insisting on a guarantee that if they vote for a bipartisan package, other priorities like climate change and social programs will pass through reconciliation. Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey and Republican Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. They are co-chairs of the House Problem Solvers Caucus. The group recently unveiled its own version of a bipartisan infrastructure plan. Will you solve any problems here today with this?
Well, we're Josh, should I go first? Yeah, no, Josh and I have been doing the hard work. You know, it's very easy to just take a pure party line approach and just be reflexive and reactive. We've taken this into three buckets. Number one, we defined what infrastructure should be for this round. We got 75% of our caucus to agree, which means we're all, locked into that vote. Round two is a scope. We agreed. Again, we got 75% of the caucus to agree at 1.25 over 8 years. And we broke that out into each category. And now we're on the paid for conversation, which is the toughest. And that's where we're meeting, Josh and I, with the G20, the group of senators that basically proposed something very similar, and they're working the White House right now.
And when you agreed on what infrastructure is, was there any agreement that some of these more social programs and other issues would be a part of that?
Well, I think we looked at it and said, what can we actually get a bipartisan deal done on?
And so
it starts with the physical infrastructure. Yeah. Roads, bridges, rail, water, broadband, hard infrastructure.
Innovation.
And we worked closely, electric vehicles, energy, and worked very closely with our Senate colleagues and have been for months. And we realized the only way to do this is actually by working together.
So can I ask you guys this? Just explain to our audience, because I love the concept, and it's awesome that you guys are running it. But talk about the Problem Solvers Caucus. Tell America what that is.
Sorry, you want to go? I know this sounds crazy, and then Brian, you jump in.
Go for it.
29 Democrats, 29 Republicans. We get together every single week with one mission: to actually get to yes versus screaming and yelling at each other. And we disagree plenty, right? I mean, Brian's a proud Republican, I'm a proud Democrat. But we stay at the table to try to get it done. We build relationships, we build trust. It takes time, like when you were in Congress, right? You actually get to know each other, get to know each other's families the way it should be. And then when we have tough situations and disagree, we stay at the table and try to find a solution.
It's so important getting to know the members personally. Elijah Cummings and I worked on a committee, and we were working toward long-term care, and we figured out about halfway through the process that our staff was actually getting directions from leadership, and were constantly trying to undermine us. I fired like half of my staff and got people on that actually weren't working for leadership. And it's because Elijah and I knew each other, trusted each other, and we knew that we each had each other's back. I mean, that makes all the difference when you're going there. If a leadership's hammering at you, if some staff's trying to undermine you, it's those relationships that we don't have enough of anymore.
Yeah. Now, Josh and I came in together in the 115th Congress, and the one thing that we talk about all the time that perplexes both of us is why people don't take the same reaction and approach to government than they do their personal relationships, where you don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You'd rather get 80% of something than 100% of nothing. And you view diversity of thought as a strength to be harnessed, not a weakness to be criticized. Why does that work in every area of our life, but yet when it comes to government, people just abandon that? They don't believe in moderation, and they just go for these fringes.
Isn't that great? I always said when people at town hall meetings back when, why don't you fight the diff? I would be like, wait, well, I'm going to ask you a question. Why don't you go into work on Monday morning? And why don't you scream at the person in the next cubicle over? See how that works. Exactly. Why do you want us to scream and yell at each other and hate each other and expect us to get anything done? I'm not asking you to scream at your coworker. So why are you asking me to scream at my coworker?
Yeah, and Joe, I would say we created really in response to the fringes that are always trying to get to know. They're always trying to block things and say no. Our motto is we try to get to yes. What can there's always going to be things we disagree on. Leave them on the side of the road. We can come back to that tomorrow. But what can we agree on and get that done incrementally?
And if you insist on getting 100% of everything, which no one gets in their life, right? You sit down, you talk to each other, you figure out just like at work.
Mika gets 100% of what she wants. But go ahead.
But you focus on getting to that, getting to 80%. In fact, when we meet, when we get to 3/4 of us agreeing, we stand together and as a block, right? That's our whole model. And we don't campaign against each other. And we take this approach of if you're going to insist on everything, you're just going to get nothing. And right now, this infrastructure deal is exactly proof of this, right? There's a deal to be had after years of just talking about infrastructure. We're finally within inches of getting this done.
Well, so my question for you, I suppose, if we're going to talk about the actual policy you guys are trying to get to yes on, the White House has sort of stepped in and said on the hardest part, which you acknowledge is the hardest part, how to pay for this, that they're not really on board with the idea of a gas tax or fees for electric vehicles, for example. They say, hey, that's going to tax people going to work every day, the middle class, people who are using the roads. I don't understand how you're going to overcome this, especially after it seemed like Democrats in the Senate were maybe getting there on some of this, but the president says no. So how do you overcome that?
Well, in our conversations, there's actually a long list of potential pay-fors, and we've been working on those for months as well. And there might be a couple you have a long list, so that a couple might not get through. But there's a lot of agreement. But there's plenty of areas where there is agreement, right, on going after and closing the tax gap and going after tax cheats. Areas like an infrastructure bank, public-private partnerships. So there's plenty of places where we're finding agreement, maybe repurposing some of the COVID dollars. And we just got to keep working through it. You got to stay at the table. And so I know some people want us to walk away and want everyone to say enough's enough. But after years, we're finally within inches. We got to stay at the table and keep working it.
What do your leaders think of this? Does Speaker Pelosi, Leader McCarthy, do they oppose this effort?
No, I mean they're
fine with it.
Certainly, and Josh can speak for his leadership. I mean, we keep them apprised, and they're encouraging it.
Anybody threaten you? Tell you to stay away from this, doing this stuff?
No. I mean, the bottom. I mean, you've got people on the wings who never like this, right? And they'll scream and yell and send emails and calls and all that kind of stuff. But the bottom line is what I found with our leadership, which is critical, and we did this when we worked on the bipartisan $908 billion package at the end of the year on COVID relief, which we were instrumental. The problem solvers was in getting done. Yeah. You just have to be upfront and transparent with your leadership. Just don't hide the ball. Yeah. And that's I always found the key. Just don't just be upfront and honest with them. Don't surprise them.
Yeah. Helene.
Joe, I love that you're asking them whether people are threatening to break their legs or anything like that.
I know. Like, anybody threaten you? But what is enough of the substance? What's the atmosphere like? I mean, is there any shouting at each other? Or do you get straight down to business when you're in the middle of all of this political vitriol that we're having? Like, what are these meetings like? How long are you guys in there? And are you actually, it can't all be nice and harmonious.
It actually is, believe it or not. And I tell everybody, both in our Problem Solver Caucus meetings and in the G20 meetings that Josh and I are part of in the Senate, you would be really proud. You really would. Everybody's very civil to each other. They're trying to figure out what the nuances are from people with different perspectives and how do we come up with something that will get it done. Now, oftentimes people, when they're in front of the TV cameras or when they're on the House floor, they conduct themselves very different. Right. But I will tell you, I've been incredibly impressed, and I tell that to everybody. You'd be really proud if you saw the substance and the civility behind closed doors.
And it takes hours. It takes hours, right? Yeah. You asked about that. Yeah. Late at night, after we're done with our meetings, we sit together literally for hours. And of course we disagree, but you do it with civility. And that's really the difference.
Yeah. And I want to touch on that because that's the most important thing. Human nature is when you get attacked, you get into a defensive posture and you respond accordingly. We don't go there. Yeah. We don't attack each other personally. If we disagree on each other's ideas, we'll debate that. Yeah, but I'll never personally attack Josh.
And Willie, the great thing is they represent two great areas. You've got Brian, who represents Bucks County, obviously really important, politically famous area. And you've got Josh, more importantly, who represents the Paramus Mall.
Exactly.
The Paramus Mall is the heart of America.
It's God's country.
That's God's country.
The Paramus, to be specific, Judge, it's the Paramus Park Mall, and they had one of the first Chick-fil-A's in all of the Northeast. I used to go there for lunch in high school. Congressman Gottheimer.
Of course you did.
Greetings from your friends in Bergen County, Congressman Gottheimer. You said you're close to a deal on infrastructure. What gives you that hope? We've heard so much pessimism that one side's over here and other side's over there. What is that space in the middle that you believe there actually be some legislation passed here?
Well, obviously the senators are working, and we talk to them all the time and keep in regular touch. I think there's, as was mentioned, there's still some differences on a couple of the pay-fors. I think a lot of the actual areas of focus from a policy standpoint of roads, bridges, rails we were talking about before, I think there's agreement there, and also general agreement on how much to spend over a period of time. We put out a package which was $1.2 $2.5 trillion over 8 years, as Brian mentioned. And I think that's the zone of where we're going to end up landing. But again, there's still negotiations going on. But I think we're very close, and we're very close in the pay-fors. So I think this is going to get done.
That's fantastic.
Co-chairs of the Problem Solvers Caucus, Congressman Josh Gottheimer and Brian Fitzpatrick. Thank you both for being on.
Thanks so much, and please come back.
Thanks, man.
All right. That's nice. See that? That just happened. Coming up, Congressman and DCCC Chairman Sean Patrick Maloney says when it comes to voting rights, Senate Republicans